We outsource all these responsibilities to other people that are just other people, And it doesn't matter what their intentions are, if they're really malicious or not, or they think they're better. It doesn't really matter. They're just other people, just another dude, just another woman. That's how I try to approach it now. Like, do you want to put your future in the hands of a random other person, or do you want to think for yourself?
I know that I'm going to be able to look my son in the eyes and say, I did everything that I possibly could to ensure the best possible future for you because I saved the value of my time and energy in Bitcoin. And unless you can say that and look your kids in the eye and say that in a decade, you're going to have some explaining to do. And you're also going to be putting your own children at a disadvantage, which I know no parent who loves their children wants to do. You want to give them every advantage that you can, so that they can then take that advantage and run with it, so they can stand on the shoulders of giants and see further. Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 848783, and the value of one Bitcoin is shockingly still one Bitcoin. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guest about Bitcoin and whatever else comes up, but this Bitcoin Talk is actually a crossover episode with Bram Kanstein, the host of Bitcoin for Millennials. Bram reached out about doing a crossover show, and I loved the idea because I love his show. So we got together and had a wide-ranging rip that I think you're really going to enjoy. And yes, this is a Bitcoin podcast where two Bitcoin podcasters talk about Bitcoin podcasting. It's basically podcast Inception. But we also talk about reaching outside the Bitcoin echo chamber, Bitcoin versus fiat, the effectiveness of orange pilling, how to make your kids not hate you later in life, a spoiler alert, just buy Bitcoin, and the changing media landscape as it shifts from centralized to decentralized. Before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're listening or watching, and check out Bram's as well, Bitcoin for Millennials. And give both of our shows a 5-star rating, or don't. Bitcoin doesn't care, but we sure would appreciate it. If you'd rather watch this show than listen, head to the show notes for links to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and now on Noster via Highlighter. But if you are like me and you prefer to just listen to your podcasts, check out fountain.fm. Not only can you send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters to give value for value, but you can earn Bitcoin just for listening to this show. And if you are already listening to the Bitcoin Podcast on Fountain, consider giving the show a boost or creating a clip of something you found interesting. Finally, if you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring yet another fucking Bitcoin podcast, hit me up on social media or through the website bitcoinpodcast.net. Without further ado, let's get into this crossover episode with Bram Kanstein.
I think from what I've seen from your podcast, you also are not an interviewer like me. You want to have conversations. I don't know if you get the comments as well, like, dude, stop talking. I don't want to hear you talk. I don't know if you get that.
I get the exact same ones, and I'm like that. That I'm not holding your feet to the fire, making you, watch this podcast. Yeah, exactly. Like, if you want to really just straight up like question and answer short block interview, there's lots of great podcasts that do that.
100%.
I just, I like to have a conversation.
Yes.
And
so me too. But that's why I think it's nice to also, talk with each other and jam. I think what is a really big, how do you say that? Like a really big point for when you have a podcast is that, I don't know what your motivation was. I think mine was pretty selfish in the sense that I use it to structure my own thoughts around Bitcoin, right? Like I'm thinking and discussing with people anyway. So why not record and share and, have these moments almost daily now where I get to reflect on my thoughts around Bitcoin, And so I'd love to have just conversations and we jam. I think this is an endless rabbit hole. So that was kind of my idea too.
That's the cool thing about it. And I forget who, I think it was maybe Stefan Livera had posted this the other day, because obviously he's, one of the real OGs, has been making great content for a long time. Him, McCormick, Marty Bent, they've been doing this, and many others, but those guys are kind of like some of the really big ones. Been doing this for a while. And somebody, you always see the comments like, why is it always the same guests, across different podcasts? Why is it, a lot of times similar topics, with these same guests? Like, like you need more variety. And Stefan made a really good point just about the fact that the audience of like people, yes, like I think all Bitcoin podcasts, you're making stuff for Bitcoiners, but also, at least for me, and clearly this was Stefan's perspective too, the goal is also to reach outside of the echo chamber. And to reach outside of the echo chamber, the people who haven't been listening to Bitcoin podcasts for years, these topics which may seem very overdone and overcovered, and these guests who maybe seem to Bitcoiners like they don't want to see any more of them. They've heard from them too much. Well, that's completely brand new to somebody who is not deeply engrossed in this Bitcoin space. And so you kind of need that, that repetition. You need that repetition of the message, because you don't know at what point in someone's Bitcoin journey down that endless rabbit hole they're going to stumble across your particular podcast and decide to go into it. So I appreciate that perspective from Stefan. It's ultimately a question of, who are you making the content for? Like, are you making it for existing Bitcoiners who are deep down the rabbit hole? And some shows like that are like NVK does the Bitcoin Review, which is awesome. Like technical deep dives on everything that's going on, every pull request that's out there in the Bitcoin space. But like that's way over the heads of somebody who's just like, I think I'll try out this Bitcoin thing. I'm going to, search for Bitcoin podcasts and let's see what I find. Like they wouldn't even know where to begin with that. Great show for those of us who like know what they're talking about, but for the average person, not so much.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think it's funny. I think you and I would be able to listen to some OGs jam, with 3 or 4 people on a podcast, but that's definitely not for people who are just getting into it. But I think it's also part of like the wave of how adoption of something new goes, right? And that was really great. And I also see you have, your momentum, and I see you also spending more time on it, just like me, right? Like I think we are part of kind of like this new generation of podcasters that also reach, new people. And Thomas Strolight said this to me, like that he thought it was really great that I actually started another podcast, because I thought, should I start another podcast? But I said, like it goes in waves, and these waves are a little overlapping, or you can see the circles overlapping, right? But that is how Bitcoin eventually grows. We have so many people to still reach, right? So I think this is one of the topics we wrote down, right? Like a Bitcoin podcast number go up, but no, it's necessary, and we reach just totally different people. Man, I even had a comment. This, I think, the comment I'm most proud of. Someone said, I found your podcast, and then I found Sailor, and then I found Breedlove. I was like, okay, my work is like what, and that is cool. Like that is actually, the internet is infinite, in that way. So it's super fun to see that works. Like it is not enough. We need to talk more about it. Bitcoin is not inevitable.
Yeah, like we are winning, I would say, but we also need to win, continue winning that information game. And if you think about this, like I initially I started this podcast as like a literal joke. Like it was going to be like another fucking Bitcoin podcast was the
name is brilliant, title. By the way. Just
and
Bitcoin podcast is just so smart.
Why not? It wasn't really taken, so
brilliant.
So, but with I was going to do like basically a Bitcoin podcast about Bitcoin podcasts as satire, and then I was like, well, I do like that idea, but also I just kind of want to have actually sincere conversations too. And so then I was like, well, shit, I guess I am like really just doing another fucking Bitcoin podcast. But like the nice thing about this is that if you think about the sheer number of podcasts out there, just podcasts generally, it is insane. Like there are orders of magnitude more true crime podcasts probably than there will ever be Bitcoin podcasts. Maybe not ever, but for a long time. True crime has a really big head start on that. And even just like finance shows that, all these like, finance gurus who give you all their different tips for how to, how to grow wealthy and all these things. And most of those don't talk about Bitcoin at all. And so we need to keep saturating this space. Like, we need to overtake that podcast mind share and build up as many fucking Bitcoin podcasts as possible. So if you're thinking about starting a Bitcoin podcast,
and you're listening,
just do it. You're going to end up doing it eventually. You may as well start now. And like, it's not too bad to start either. A couple $100 for a decent microphone, and you're good to go. Like, that's really all you need.
But what was your motivation to? Well, you wanted to start a satire one, right? But what was your motivation to be a bit more serious then?
It was honestly that I felt that there were some gaps in my Bitcoin podcast experience that I felt could be filled. As in, like, before I started one, like I've listened to What Bitcoin Did and Bitcoin Audible with Guy Swan. Like, those were the two that I really started out with. Saifedean's as well, but a little bit later. But those were the two, and still are, that I consistently go back to over and over again. And I think Guy and Peter just do a fantastic job. But at the same time, I was also kind of missing some of the news angle of things. Like, they're the only like kind of news Bitcoin podcasts were really like these crypto podcasts. And I was like, I don't want the other fluff in there. So I started out actually just doing like condensed news reads on this show, with the goal of like, okay, I also want to do read some books and articles on here like Guy Swan does. I want to focus more on the Austrian economic side of things too, as kind of a foundational piece. I've continued doing that. And then I only added the interviews in later because I was also just thinking, well, I love to talk to Bitcoiners, and people really, you can explore things in a long form, person to person conversation so much more deeply than you can giving just a news brief. And I also then realized writing even like a 20-minute, news episode, it takes a really long time. Like, it's a lot of work to source it all and then like actually write it all and make sure it's cohesive and ties together. So I kind of have dropped those a little bit as dad life has me a little bit busier. So now I'm pretty much just doing the reads, doing these, interviews. But like you said, it's a really nice thing to be able to kind of use these sessions as an opportunity to explore your own ideas. Like, you get to talk to great people. I get to talk to people too that it's like, I've already made friends with most of these people, at conferences and whatever else. So you hit them up and it's just like having a conversation with an old friend. You don't see him all the time, but when you get together, it's a good time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But also, today I was a guest on a podcast, Physical, which is, by the way, way better. Yeah. And we talked about how big Bitcoin is with regards to just the topic that it covers, right? Like, just money is the biggest thing in the world. It's really what creates all our incentives and how we communicate with each other and what is value and all these things, right? And we talked about that this morning, and now that you're saying this, I think like that is also, it is intellectually also the most rewarding, and it is the most difficult thing, I think, to reflect on and discuss, etc. Like, you can find factual information about how Bitcoin works, right? And you can find news items in a lot of different places, right? But why it is important, or how you view it, or how I view it, or how the people we talk to view it, right? In those conversations, there are triggers for other people to be like, oh, really? Is it like that? Oh, I should dive into that more. And you don't know what those triggers are, right? Like, I mean, I cannot retrace my steps from discovering Bitcoin 10 years ago, buying at 400, selling at 4,000, up and down, ETH, ICOs, NFTs, blah, and then eventually the light, right? I cannot retrace those steps like very specifically, right? But I know there have been a few triggers along the way where I was like, oh, wow, okay, if I view it like this. So, for example, when I was 30, I had a mortgage and in Bitcoin, and I worked at a bank. And then I had a colleague tell me, did you know the money in the bank is not yours? And I was like, what are you talking about? And then we talked for an hour, and he explained it to me, and I was like, damn, I'm an idiot. I felt like an idiot. Like, I was... This
was your banker colleague telling you this?
Yes, correct.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And,
good for him.
Well, he explained fractional reserve banking to me. And I just felt, I remember really well that I felt like an idiot. Like I'm participating in a system that I don't understand. And it's funny because I'm a pretty risk averse person and maybe a little control freak. So I was like, that's idiotic. Like, what am I doing, right? And so that kind of triggered me to go deeper down, like kind of like the finance, dimension of Bitcoin. But mind you, I was already into Bitcoin, right? And so you have like these different points that trigger you to go down a certain dimension further and learn about it and see how it ties together. And another one, for example, was when I realized, Bitcoin is not investing, Bitcoin is saving, right? Like I create value, I get a reward, I save that reward in fiat money, or no, I put it on a bank where it's not mine. Why am I doing that? So I want to move to another system where I am truly, the owner. That property is actually mine, right? And I save that economic energy in an asset that cannot be debased. When that clicked, I started to move. I was selling everything, and moving all the stuff all the energy that I had. Like, and so those are like these little moments in time, right? And I think just by talking about it and I have my own different background and perspective, you have yours, the guests have them as well, right? And so the people listening connect to different people at different moments, and I think that is where the value is, right? So there can never be enough Bitcoin podcasts in that sense. Yeah.
Amen. Bitcoin Podcast NGU is a very good thing. Again, we need to flood the market, overtake all the Finance Bro podcasts.
Yeah.
Get top of the charts in any sort of finance category, but only talk about Bitcoin. But you're right about the triggers, because I know it's like, and I think there's that trigger that first makes you want to really dive into Bitcoin, and then there's the triggers along the way that make you realize how little you still understand. And somebody put, like, one of those, like, along my Bitcoin journey was reading Jeff Booth's The Price of Tomorrow, and just being like, the whole concept that, okay, technology is naturally deflationary, so why is everything always getting more expensive? And it's like, okay, yes, now that you've said it, it seems obvious. But until then, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective of the deflationary nature of technology. And then also when you're looking at, I was already, understanding, monetary inflation and these things like that, but thinking about it from the fact that not only are they debasing the currency and that, they are stealing from you that way, but they're able to debase it so much more because of the naturally deflationary nature of technology. That hides so much, all those productivity and efficiency gains hides so much of the theft that they're doing. And that's the only if we didn't have that natural deflation tendency with technology, I don't think they would have been able to get away with this sham for so long. But they have been, and that was just like kind of oh shit, this just kind of took me down this whole nother path of how I want to look at this, how I need to approach it, and also just like the scale of this theft and how genuinely bad this is, that, everything should be getting cheaper. We are so much more efficient, so much more productive, but it's not. And we're also somehow still working the same or more hours. We're not getting any of those gains that entrepreneurs around the world have made possible because it's being stolen by systematic theft, which, so my point being, you're exactly right that you never know what's going to trigger somebody to go a little bit deeper and then a little bit deeper. And it's different for everyone, I think. And it's different, you're, without doxing yourself, I would guess you're somewhere in the EU.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm somewhere in America as well. So we've got obviously very different, I was born and raised in America. I live in America now. I've traveled extensively, both for work and pleasure. But I'm always going to have a different set of perspectives and just kind of inherent biases than someone who was born and raised in a European nation. And that's a good thing too. It means we approach things differently. We have different perspectives, but it also means different things might flip that light switch on, which again is a good thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is a nice leeway to something else that we wrote down about, I think I wrote it down, but like orange pilling is not explaining Bitcoin. I shared with you. But to add to what you said about, the the price of tomorrow. This is also something I talked about this morning in that podcast. You can factually find how Bitcoin works, like on the internet, right? Like you can read how it works and, have it explained to you. That's actually my first interaction with, or when I found Bitcoin, was a Vimeo video that was titled like Bitcoin Explained. It's offline now, or it's hidden, so I cannot link to it anywhere, which is a pity. But anyway, like you can find that, right? But why is this thing that works in a certain way, why is that important right now? And I think if we want to reach more people to help them understand the problem that they have, I think what you just touched upon is what we should talk about, right? So I think it's simple to explain that the goal of people is to become more efficient, right? We build technology to become more efficient constantly. So if things get more efficient and we all get more productive, like all the innovation in the past has been about compressing energy in a certain way so that we can do more with less energy, right? So from monks writing in a book to the printing press, from horses to trains and all these things, right? I think everyone would agree that that is what humans do, right? So if that is what we do, why is a bread $5, as you as you alluded to, A bread should be free and nobody should be hungry, right? And I always use the example of, there was a child show in my country, and there was the main character had like a little pill that he put in seawater, and then boom, like a bread popped out. Like he got a bread from like a pill in the water. And I'm just thinking, like, why aren't we there? What is going on, right? And what you said is 100% correct. We should already be there, and we are way further ahead, obviously, technology-wise. But if a bread is not free and there's still people who are hungry and the bread is actually $4 or $5, which side do you think is winning? The deflationary line versus the inflationary line, right? Guess which side is winning. We have worse bread, which is more expensive than 1961, right? We are going back in time. We're back to the invention of bread, as if we look at how it's priced, right? That is how bad it is, right? And I love drilling down on this thought because I think we have to show people how big this problem is, right? You know the meme, like we talked about flying car. They promised us flying cars, but all we got was, whatever. That is fucking real. Like, we are living in it, and we should realize that. Although we have amazing technology, we are thousands of miles away from each other. We are talking live and all these things. Like, we have that, but we could be so much further along, like light years further probably, if it wasn't for the broken money we use to price all these things in.
It's such a good point, and I think you're right about the explaining Bitcoin is not how you orange pill someone to Bitcoin, because really it's very difficult to understand. Like, you could have Bitcoin explained to you. You could have it all broken down. You could understand that from a technical perspective even. But if you don't understand what the problem is that Bitcoin fixes, that's kind of irrelevant. Like, there's no meaning behind it. There's no why. There's no why are we even doing this in the first place? Like, oh, that's a neat technology you've got there, but if I don't know why it is actually important, what is actually this problem, this pain point that it addresses, then it's irrelevant. Then it's just a cool little whirly-do. yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, neat, but who cares?
Yeah.
And so I think, and again, that pain point is also different for everyone, because especially in the developed world, in the Western world, we are obviously, very financially privileged. Because we print money out of thin air and we export it to developing countries who make things for us at rock bottom prices, so that we can further hide how much money we've actually been printing. Like, that's the other thing. From America's standpoint, like, our number one export is the U.S. dollar. And it
Very
is
smart.
really, it's brilliant. It's really cheap to make. You don't even have to print it anymore. You don't even have to use the paper. You just have to put a couple more entries in your central bank Excel sheet, and you're off to the races. But so for people in the Western world, that it's like, well, there's this insane Keynesian idea that for some reason really took hold in the minds of the academic elite that we need to keep creating money so that we stimulate the economy, as if without just the creation of money ex nihilo, we would be no one would do anything. There would be stagnation. The economy would grind to a stop, and we'd all be dead. And it's like, well, if you think about that for more than 2 seconds, it's very obvious that that's ridiculous. Like people have innate drive. And for selfish reasons, like they want to make their lives better. That's a good thing. All of us acting in our own self-interest to make a better life for ourselves, for our family, for our future generations. That's what drives humanity forward. It's that idea that I want to make my place in this world better. I want to make it better for my family. Maybe I want to make it better for my community too. Maybe my family extends slightly outward there. But this idea that, oh, well, if we don't print money, people will there won't be any growth.
It's such nonsense.
It's
right?
insane.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
I don't understand.
You buy a bread. Who makes the bread? Someone who likes making bread, right? Like, where do you sell the bread? In an area where there's houses or stores next to each other, maybe. It's so stupid. It's so simplistic. It's wild.
I think my other big problem, and I think it's a problem for a lot of Bitcoiners, my frustration is just the hubris, the self-importance of the central planners to think that they can centrally plan an economy better than all of the hundreds of millions, or if we're talking globally, billions of people who inhabit this world, making decisions in their own best interest. They truly think that because they are smart enough, and if they get their little theoretical calculations about what humans do with their money and what they want, if they get them just right, then everything will be perfect. And that we just need to give them a little bit more time and get close to this. And it's like, you just can't do it. You can't even do it with an AGI. You can't possibly have all of the information that 8 billion people making individual decisions on a split-second basis, constantly, individual value judgments, subjectively valuing things, and revaluing them constantly around the world with a relation of matrices that we can't even possibly comprehend. Not even an AGI could do that. It would create a black hole. It would use all the energy in the universe and create a black hole and suck us all into it, and then we're gone. Yeah. And yet, these old farts sitting in some, wood-paneled office think that they somehow know better than those 8 billion people. And they're just people too. They're just normal fucking people who think that somehow they're a little bit better, and that they need to make the decisions for, the rest of the folks, because they can't possibly know what's best for them. The central planners always know best. And we know how that works out throughout history. Not well.
No, I love that you say this, because this is what I never really tried orange pilling or something. I explained Bitcoin, but I now switched more to asking questions. No, why do you believe this? Why do you ask me this? How do you think this works? But this, what you just mentioned, all these people that control you are also just people. No one has a clue what they're doing. If they look up to the stars, no one has a clue what the fuck is going on, right? Where are we? In what? How long? Where from? Everybody's winging it, right? And I use that as an argument a lot, because these people have egos, they have individual lives, they have family, children, their own fucking personal internal struggle, like anyone has. But yeah, the simplest way to put it is they don't give a fuck, as in they just talk. But we also don't give a fuck, because we just take it, right? Like they say A and we say, well, sounds about right. Let's do it. And if you hear Janet Yellen say or what's her name? Oh, sorry, Christine Lagarde, from the ECB, it's like, we have to tame the monster that is inflation. I think really, did that just came from your mouth in your position? And, but hear me out. I hear the same, and I keep forgetting her name, the White House press woman.
Karine Jean-Pierre,
yes,
I think.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm looking at America from an outside view, right? But sometimes I hear her say things where I think, like, really? Like, are you testing the acceptance of the audience right now? Like, are you just being like, I'm just going to say this really weird thing, and then I'm just going to see if anyone actually cares what I say, right? And it's just so crazy, because I think what we need to realize is that, yes, these are just other people. And for some reason, they think that they can actually figure it out for us. Like, what happened there? When did this like turn around? I talked to Rune Ostgaard. He's a Norwegian Bitcoiner. And he told me about, like, in this, I don't know, 15, 16 something hundreds in Norway, you had a king. And the king had an agreement with the citizens that if he would screw them over, they were allowed to kill him. That was their agreement.
It's a confident king,
but that kept him in check, right? And it's the same with Rune. I also talked about, I don't know if you watched Peaky Blinders, but that's like in the 1920s, right? And there's a lot of unwritten rules in the 1920s, especially between criminals, right? So if we would do a deal, the unwritten rule is, if we spit on our hands and we shake hands, that is the deal is done, right? That we do what we just agreed to do. If I double cross you, I know that I legitimized you to kill me, and the other way around. And you see that in the show as well. Like, sometimes they double cross each other, they get caught, and they're like, okay, where do you want me? And then, they execute the guy that double crossed him. And it sounds very brutal, and obviously it is, but it is very transparent, right? Yeah. It is like, okay, a deal's a deal, and if I don't adhere to the deal, I pay the highest price, and I'm actually okay with it, right? People still try to fuck each other over, and sometimes they get caught, right? But that I was thinking where I wanted to go with that, but just that equalness, in a sense, is just totally gone, right? Like, most people, and me too, before I really went all into Bitcoin, it's just we outsource all these responsibilities to other people that are just other people, And it doesn't matter what their intentions are, if they're really malicious or not, or they think they're better. It doesn't really matter. They're just other people, just another dude, just another woman. Like that. So that's how I try to approach it now. Like, do you want to put your future in the hands of a random other person, or do you want to think for yourself?
Let's talk about why you should ditch your ledger and pick up the fully open source Bitcoin-only BitBox02 hardware wallet from BitBox Swiss. First, you can use promo code Walker for 5% off the BitBox02. And second, you need hardware built by a company you don't have to trust, and I don't know how much you can trust Ledger, given their past history, but you can actually verify for yourself. Head to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source, Bitcoin-only BitBox02 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin off the exchange or off your ledger and into your own custody. I love the BitBox02 because it is truly easy as hell to use, whether you are brand new to Bitcoin or you are a seasoned psychopath. Again, it is fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and verify for yourself. There is no need to trust me or Bitbox. And when you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off, but you also help support this fucking podcast. Now, a lot of you listening to this show may already be deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, but if you're listening to this podcast and feeling a bit overwhelmed by all of it, don't sweat it. BitcoinConsulting.us has you covered. Some people go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole completely solo, but others want someone to guide them and help them out along this journey. If you're one of the latter, go to BitcoinConsulting.us. Now, whether you're an individual and you want someone to help you with your personal Bitcoin strategy, or you're a company and you want help integrating Bitcoin payments, implementing private projects, or you need some sort of contract or services, Bitcoin Consulting has you covered. Again, Go to bitcoinconsulting.us and book a consultation today. That's bitcoinconsulting.us. Amen. And I think you touched on something really important there, which is that there is actually zero accountability in the institutional structures that we have today. There's the veneer of accountability. Like, for example, in the United States, there were multiple Federal Reserve Bank presidents, because we have there's Jerome Powell, who's the chair, and then we've got the different Federal Reserve banks, and two different presidents. I'm gonna think it's Eric Rosengren and Robert Kaplan were their names, and they were caught like insider trading, like making massive trades ahead of key Fed policy decisions during the COVID time.
Wow.
Like this is worse than like senators and Congress people insider trading, because these guys are literally right. They're right there. They're the ones that are directly closest to the creation of the money. So as offensive as it is to me that there's Congress people that are insider trading, the fact that Federal Reserve presidents would do that is so fucking outrageous to me. Yeah. And I was like, okay, please tell me they're sending these guys to jail. Obviously they didn't. What did they do? Well, they both resigned. Oh, okay, they resigned. Filthy rich, of course. And then, what happens next? Is there any disciplinary action? Well, we've introduced stronger ethics rules. And it's like, well, your ethics rules didn't stop them from doing it in the first place. If your ethics rules worked, then they would have worked. But they didn't, so they don't. And so there's zero accountability there whatsoever. And there's also zero accountability for just making god-awful policy decisions, and or for just blatantly lying to people, like Lagarde. Inflation is a hump, and a hump will come down. It will come, and no, inflation compounds year after year. So unless it is an active deflation scenario, it's never coming down. Prices are permanently higher because you've inflated the supply of money. But there's never any accountability to that. Jerome Powell, same thing, and it just doesn't matter. It's this big revolving door club. Janet Yellen was at the Fed before she was at the Treasury. Christine Lagarde was at the IMF and did some illegal shit there. It's this, like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. Yeah. And it's so true. And it's a club where they all have each other's backs. There's zero accountability. And if you think that they work for the people, you need to open your fucking eyes. And so that's, that's the black pill part. The white pill part is, at least now we have Bitcoin. At least now we have something that we do not have to rely on them, the others who are in charge of the fiat world. There's no need for us to trust. We can verify. And we can also begin to opt out of that system by taking our monetary energy and putting it elsewhere. And that's a really powerful, incredibly transformative thing. Because there's not, gold was great. Gold worked pretty well for 5,000 years. Gold doesn't work in the information age. It just doesn't. It's slow. It's a shiny rock. It's questionably scarce on Earth, and certainly not scarce in the sense of the solar system and the larger galaxies beyond. But Bitcoin works, and it works without the need for any sort of interference or manipulation or hubris on the part of some unelected central banking bureaucrats. So that's the white pill, because there are reasons to be hopeful. Shit is, to put it very bluntly, shit is really fucked up, but there's hope. Yeah. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. What I do find difficult is that when you, I think I talked with Jeff Booth about this, when he says inflation is theft, right? And I asked him why. I understand what you're saying, but for some people that word theft is a really heavy word, right? And how can we approach that? Because I also in conversations have talked about, as you said, the people that corrupt the system that they are in charge of. That's the worst. Like, they should be an example, not the random citizen that, doesn't pay their taxes or whatever, do something wrong. Like, these people should be the prime example of following the rules that we all agree to follow, right? But nobody seems to care. At least not enough people seem to care, right? And I try to explain to people, like, you have to understand that if you are in a system that has the possibility, you have the possibility to corrupt it because you see an opportunity. You can say from a distance, no, I would never do that, right? I'm a righteous person. I would never do that. But 100%, because you just talked about self-preservation, 100%. If you think, the system is fucked anyway, I'm here, I can do this or that, blah, blah. If you're really honest, you would do that. You have a young child, you see the self-preservation there. I need food, look at me, take care of me, like all these things. Like it's inherently in all of us, right? And I think, I don't know if that's black pill, white pill, blue, red pill, whatever. The first pill you have to take is that you have to accept that. Your rational mind is like, oh no, I would never do that. But your primal mind will 100,000% do that point. Like, that's a hill I will die on, I think. So once we accept that if I would do it, someone in a position of power who doesn't care about my individual life, they will also do it, right? And that does impact my individual life. So if there is a system, a monetary system in which we don't have to trust anyone, and everyone trusts each other because everyone trusts each other, right? Or you can trust each other because you don't have to trust each other, basically. Then that solves that human tendency to corrupt the systems that we are part of or in charge of or whatever, right? But what I find, and I wonder about your experience, that is already such a big, far away, kind of like scary realization for people that a lot of people do not want to accept, right? Especially if you live in a Western country where you've never had to worry about anything, right? In comparison to the rest of the world, being poor in a Western country is, you have no problem. I know, everyone has individual problems and all these things. I'm not, yes, I'm kind of generalizing, but more like, being poor in a Western country is not the same as being poor in Burkina Faso, right? Or, rural India or something like that. So from our perspective, money just works. And if someone comes along with that big thing that I just explained, you're like, you're crazy. What are you talking about? No, I'm fine. My life is fine. It's just so hard for people already. To add one thing, you also talked to Maya. And when I talked to her, from Suriname, I told her I always kind of prided myself in the fact that I figured out Bitcoin without actually having the problem, right? Coming from a Western country, I was like, oh, it's pretty cool that I figured this out because I don't even have the problem, right? I would assume that people who have the problem are the ones that would adopt Bitcoin. And then she really humbled me. She said, like, you have to remember that people in Suriname, they have $200-300 a month and they're surviving every day. They don't have time for like conversation like this, right? Or study or debate themselves or whatever. They're hungry and their child is hungry and they need to find food and they need to be safe, And so maybe back to why more Bitcoin podcasts, or we should never stop talking about this. That's exactly this, because the people who actually would need it, they don't even have time to study and also adopt it, right? So I also feel like we have to, not do it for them, but we are kind of like obligated to talk about this because they definitely don't have time to do that.
Yeah. There's a couple things I want to touch on there. The first of them is just about like the tendency to, like, if you're in this position, you too would probably steal or do something immoral because out of just self-preservation and the desire to ultimately make things better for yourself and your family. And I think that it's important to point out that in a system that is based on theft, Of course, people are incentivized to be thieves. The system itself is based on thievery. So yeah, you're going to have more thieves. In a system that's based on an honest ledger instead of a corrupt and theft-based ledger, well, on that honest ledger, you actually incentivize people to be honest.
Yes.
To act, morally, however you want to define those. But I think there are some very, like, don't steal from other people is kind of like a basic moral that most people have, no matter where you're from, what religion you may practice. Like, that's kind of one of the core ones. Don't take don't take the fruits of someone else's labor. That's wrong, and it's wrong unless you're a psychopath. Like, and then you're just like, fuck it, I'll take whatever. I deserve this, and I literally can't empathize with that other person. But psychopaths aside, on an honest ledger, people are incentivized to be honest. You're incentivized because by being honest, and that's the whole game theory of Bitcoin, what it comes down to is that, when it comes to, like you think of nation state adoption of Bitcoin, even, like it's all still self-preservation, but it's self-preservation with an honest ledger behind it. Yeah. And so with that self-preservation, you are incentivized to work harder, to become more productive, to add more value, to create more value. And by doing so, you are able to then take the fruits of your labor and whatever you don't need to consume in the moment, you can then save on that honest ledger and know that theft is not possible on that honest ledger. You have your piece of the pie, that pie of 21 million Bitcoin, and that can't be adulterated somehow. Your Bitcoin cannot be literally stolen from you. So it can't be stolen from inflation. It can't be confiscated. And when that happens, like you have potential for true anarchy. And I mean anarchy in
a positive way. Yeah.
The literal sense of the word. And I talk about this like a lot because I think it's important and people get the idea of anarchy wrong. And it's the idea that it's rules without rulers. It just means no masters. And that's what Bitcoin is. It's a set of rules, but there are no rulers. There are no masters. There are no slaves because there are no masters.
Correct.
And that idea that you can have a nonviolent, honest, and cooperative society where it's cooperative because cooperating is the best way to bring more value for yourself. In our current system, it is violent. It is not cooperative. It is theft-based. The best way, if you really want to accrue the most value to yourself, the best way to do that is to find a way to steal it. Yes. Whether that be through, through playing that fiat game. And so that, again, that's a black pill with a little bit of a white pill, that things can get better. And as we start to build up this parallel system, things are going to get better. And you already see things getting better. Like personally, for my family, things have gotten better because I have a superior technology in which to save the value of my time and energy. For the people that I know, I'm sure for yourself, for other Bitcoiners I know, their lives are getting better, not worse. Their purchasing power is increasing, not decreasing. Their optionality is increasing, not decreasing. And because of that, they're able to actually live their lives and take care of their families. And that's a beautiful thing because that's ultimately, like I don't know how, and again, no need to dox anything. I don't know how old your kid or kids are, but my son is 6 months now. And I am so glad that, I work a fiat job. It's a family business fiat job, so it's a little bit better than just a cog in a corporate wheel, so I can't complain. But I save in Bitcoin. And because of that, my family has more optionality. That's all that I want. I want to be able to give a secure future for my son. Yeah. And when you're able to do that and do it with confidence because you know that it's not going to be stolen from you, then you can actually live as you want to live. And that's powerful. And the more people that can do that, the better this world gets. The less people steal,
Yeah, fully agree. What I like to, characterize the fiat money system by, that's a zero-sum game, right? even subconsciously, people are participating in that game, right? Some people steal, not because they're bad people. It's because they see an opportunity to self-preservate, right? And, oh, well, what they do is then not by the laws, right? It's not... I like to think that most people are good. You know, well, we could go this entire spiritual way, right? But if you think we are all one, then, you know, eventually, then there is no difference between you and me. It's more the context or the setting, you know, or where we ended up in our body that made us the way we are, right? And so the fiat money system is a zero-sum game, whereas the Bitcoin money system is a mutually beneficial game. And that is, I think, also, you know, Jeff Booth talks about the paradigm shift. That's also why this is so hard to understand, right? Sometimes I hear myself talk and I think like, damn, that sounds like snake oil salesman, right? Or that sounds too good to be true, right? Or what you just said, if you adopt Bitcoin, you will have more time for your family. You know, you should adopt Bitcoin. Like, it sounds... you know, shady as fuck.
It's like, this must be a scam.
But, yeah, 100%, right? But it's just the fact that, you know, if you turn it around, I like to turn these things around, right? So you can look at it from a negative point of view, and well, you get a lot of comments, I think, also on YouTube. There's, you know, and Eric Kaysen talks a lot about this. You know, this nihilism in this zero-sum fiat game. That is what is at the surface level, right? People don't believe you, or they are just mean on the internet for a random reason, while we are spending hours of our time to try to, you know, share the message about this thing, and they're just commenting on their little keyboard, you know, like that those negative thoughts are a consequence of the fucking game you are forced to play without you knowing that you're actually playing it, or maybe you are subject of the game and you have no clue, right? We should become aware of that, because that mutually beneficial game is only a game of building. We are building together. What I do is beneficial for you, and I don't have to do something that is directly affecting you, but we are in this like one big group of people that are building together. But that sounds too good to be true, because the current paradigm that people live in is not like that, right? And people get abused, and people corrupt systems, and all these things. And so I think, again, we should talk about that more, that we don't even have to talk about Bitcoin itself. You should talk about, you know, what is the matrix that you're in? Like, it is really the matrix. Because once you understand that that exists, that there's an alternative to your paradigm, you cannot ignore that anymore, right? So then you have to figure out which pill do I take, in a sense. And I also agree with you, like what you said, like you have more, it's beneficial for your family. I always saw money as buying time to figure out what's the next thing, but I didn't understand what I actually thought until I was all into Bitcoin. Like, so I had that thought before, but later I realized that it, even with the, you know, following that kind of, let's say, first principle in my life, that it was made harder by the money that I used to do that. And now on like a Bitcoin standard, the money really is the time. And it's kind of like your future, I don't know, it feels like a slow motion morphing. I don't know if that's the right way to characterize it, but it feels like the time gets stretched. But I think it's actually going back to the normal pace of time versus, you know, what Safe Dean talks about, the high time preference, that you feel like you have to go and move all the time and do things and buy things. And, you know, I think Bitcoin takes you back to just the normal pace of time, in a sense. And that when you have a young child, that you can, I don't know, be at home for the first 3 months or 6 months or maybe a year, whatever you want to do, right? Like, you are now unable to do that. And on a fiat money standard, it's just really hard.
Yeah, and I think, you know, so your podcast is Bitcoin for Millennials, right? And I think that's I'm, as a millennial myself, I'd like to see that. And I think we're an interesting, you know, every generation is interesting, right? we're an interesting crossover generation, right? Because we're not digital natives. We're digital converts. Like we still remember, like we didn't have Wi-Fi, and then we had dial-up internet, and then DSL,
analog TV. It's fun.
Yeah, and so like, we didn't grow up with the latest iPhone in our hands at the age of 6 or whatever. That didn't happen. So we bridged this interesting gap technologically, and also a lot of millennials started coming into the workforce around right at and around the 2008 financial crisis, like literally the worst possible time. A lot of millennials also started then having kids right before, during, and after COVID. Another just shitty time for a lot of people. For me, COVID was pretty great in a lot of ways, because I found and went deep into Bitcoin during it. My life got much better during COVID, and I think that's true for a lot of Bitcoiners. But now, like, I've got a kid. He's an awesome little dude. He's 6 months old. Loves to smile all the time. Finds everything hilarious. He's going to be quite a little joker, I think. But I'm thinking about, like, when I stack Bitcoin, I'm like, oh, this isn't just for me and for my wife. This is for you. This is for your future. The time preference, the low time preference, really sinks in even more, because it's not just even my lifetime I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about from a generational perspective. And I think that right now, if you are a millennial, I mean, if you're anyone, but I'll speak to millennials specifically, because we are in that in-between generation. If you are a millennial and you are not stacking Bitcoin, you are going to have really, really uncomfortable conversations with your children in a few years, when Bitcoin becomes so self-evident and so obvious, and especially in retrospect, that your kids ask you, Daddy, Mommy, why don't we have any Bitcoin? When, like Walker's parents have Bitcoin, like why don't we have any Bitcoin? This is going to be your kids are going to think you are a fucking moron if you learned about Bitcoin, grew up at a time when you could have studied Bitcoin and bought Bitcoin, and then continued to just ignore it and ignore it and ignore it. And we all ignore Bitcoin. Most of us, I ignored Bitcoin the first few times I heard about it. Shame on me. But that's okay, because I came around to it eventually. We all come around to it eventually, but right now is a particularly, I would say, important time to do so, and to do so quickly, because the world is changing very fast. There's late stage empire vibes. That doesn't mean things are going to come crashing down in a day. This fiat system is going to milk everything it can out of the world before it eventually crashes and burns. But in the meantime, you have a window of time in which you can drastically alter the lives of yourself, of your family, of your kids, of their future kids, of your great-grandkids. You have the potential to change that, and all it takes is a little bit of time and attention. Turn off the game for one night, turn off the Real Housewives of whatever the fuck you watch. I don't know if Real Housewives shows are as big over in Europe, but they are disgustingly big here, and I don't fucking understand it. Like, it is probably about the most absurd waste of time I could ever imagine. That's beside the point.
Watching other people live is wild.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. Take a moment away from watching other people live and fantasizing about their lives and what their lives are and what yours could maybe be, but you think it never will. And do a little bit of studying. Make it so that your life can be the one that you want, and a life that you're proud of, and a life that you're proud to hand over to your kids, and that they're proud to hand over to their kids. Because you have a shrinking window of time where you can really make a massive, massive change in your future state and your family's future state. And buying, we're always going to be early to Bitcoin. You're always going to be earlier than somebody else. But right now, it's still very early. Like, we just got these fucking ETFs here in America. And I'm never going to tell anyone what to do with their money, but if you really want to, move the needle on your own personal sovereignty a little bit, I would recommend that you hold your own Bitcoin in self-custody. But if you have a 401k sitting there and you have the ability to convert all of it into a Bitcoin ETF, well, that's a good start while you figure out how to self-custody your own Bitcoin, But I truly think 10 years time, when millennial children are of the age where they're going to start asking a lot of questions because the world may be in a really strange place, for better or for worse. I know that I'm going to be able to look my son in the eyes and say, I did everything that I possibly could to ensure the best possible future for you because I saved the value of my time and energy in Bitcoin. And unless you can say that and look your kids in the eye and say that in a decade, you're going to have some explaining to do. And you're also going to be, you're going to be putting your own children at a disadvantage, which I know no parent who loves their children wants to do. You want to give them every advantage that you can, so that they can then take that advantage and run with it, so they can stand on the shoulders of giants and see further. And that's so. Message to the other millennials out there, and to the boomers. Boomers, feel free to buy Bitcoin too. But I'm not so worried about you.
I got a lot of boomers in my comments, actually.
Yeah?
Lots of boomers on YouTube.
Positive or negative?
Very interesting. No, very positive.
That's great.
I'm 67. I sold everything. I'm all into Bitcoin. I'm 71, 72. I got them all. Yeah, it's wild. Yeah,
that's cool. Awesome, though.
I mean, in general, for me, boomers that are into Bitcoin, huge signal for me. Probably the biggest. People who profited from the fiat money system, in a crazy way, and they are like, this is all wrong. I need to adopt this other thing before I die. Like, what do I have to say about that? Like, against that, right? Like that realization really humbled me. Like seeing those stories and these people, I'm like, okay, they changed their mind. Do you know how hard it is to change your mind at like 60, 64? What the hell? Like these people are the biggest signal for me. I love what you shared. I think it's funny. I had a dinner on Monday. I was sitting. We had like 20 people on the table, but I was sitting opposite of a guy who was like, hey, dude, I listened to your show. I was like, whoa, that's just really cool. But he's like, I think the name is really brilliant. I said, why? He said, well, it's a niche thing. He has like a marketing agency, so he's like all into it. He's like, well, it's a niche thing, but it's niche. It's big enough. I said, well, yeah, that was the point. But he said, you know what? It should actually not exist. Why is it called Bitcoin for millennials? Why do millennials need Bitcoin? That's the entire problem. You captured the problem in the name of the podcast. And I was like, what? I never thought about it like that. But I think what you just said illustrates to that. Like I really hope that there's some people who listen who think like, oh yeah, I'm watching other people live their life and I'm not thinking about my life. And that's pretty fucked up. Like I need to start thinking for myself. Yes, that's the entire thing. Everyone is distracted, That's why the meme of thinking about the Roman Empire is so funny, because they had bread and circuses in the Roman Empire. That's literally what you're doing, right? If you are at your job and there's people like, hey, did you catch the game last weekend? That's a fucking circus. Like that is part of the circus, If you watch the baseball game 4 hours, that's not 4 hours studying Bitcoin or whatever is going on, in your society with the money. Like that's the entire point. So once you realize that is actually happening, and you are being played, which is just, again, I hear myself say this, and I think like 2 years ago I would have not said this, right? So it's just so funny how it changed your mind. But I think like that is the entire thing, and you don't have to go as crazy as like, I listen to Bitcoin stuff and finance stuff and economic stuff all day now. This is the only thing I listen to because I'm just totally fascinated with it, right? I'm not saying you have to do that, but like stop watching the game. Stop watching fucking reality TV. Stop playing Call of Duty just for like 1 fucking week and just study what this is. Like, what is money? Like, dude, I talked to a guy who's master of economics, double master's degree, whatever. He's like, I never learned what is money in my entire study. So I think like how should general people understand this, right? Like a double master's of economics doesn't have a clue what money is. He just learned to calculate with units or something. That's how he explained it to me. And so I think like, come on, like I want to trigger people like that. I don't know how to do it differently, but It winds me up because I just want more people to see this, right? And I love what you said about, if your child asks you, because our children will be super informed about the world, you have some real explaining to do. I was just fucking around while I was 33 and you were there. That's what you're going to say. Okay.
It's true. It's like, and for those people who truly enjoy watching a ball game or watching the Real Housewives of, Go Fuck Yourself, Phil, wherever it is, to those people, do whatever the fuck you want.
It is fine, of course.
It's fine. However, like, you don't have to listen to Bitcoin podcasts all the time. You don't have to, study economics all the time. You don't have to read everything Mises and Rothbard and Hayek wrote. You could, and you would probably find a lot of enjoyment and enlargement of your brain there, but you don't have to. But what you could do is just take a little bit of a break, because that's the crazy thing. Like, and you see this in most of the Bitcoin critics. It's like, it's very evident that they haven't even spent 10 hours, let alone 100 hours, let alone 1,000 hours studying this thing. But if you just take, if you genuinely took a couple hours a night for a week, where you're usually watching some sort of garbage TV show, and you do just some actual dedicated study, or you could probably listen to a different
standard. Listen to the Bitcoin standard.
Right. You could just do that, and that little bit of time and attention away from your normal distractions, away from the bread and circuses, that could change your entire life and the lives of everyone that will follow you. And and if you're a dink, a dual income, no kids, and you're never going to have kids, so you don't care about the future generations, fine. This will allow you to live your best dink life. But hey, if you want to take yourself out of the gene pool voluntarily, be my guest. That's more room for my son to dominate. So, yeah.
I think two things there. I think everyone should do whatever they want, obviously, but I think you cannot complain about it, right? Like, I am, my new word is fascinated, or fascinating. I'm just fascinated by a lot of people. These progressive people that want to fix like all these things in the world, they think it's because of capitalism or the dirty something, or the, CEO of company this or that, or blah, blah, blah. No, it's about incentives. And we talked about that, right? And like, incentives are broken because money is broken. Eventually, everything is downstream from money, right? But if you talk to progressives, and there are some progressive Bitcoiners, right, like on Twitter, but like people who say like, oh yeah, I'm a liberal, progressive, something, they hate Bitcoin. They hate it. They cannot. They cannot compute, right? And I would love also to reach like those people, because everyone wants a better world. Like, who doesn't want a better world, right? Just from your local community. You want green, you want schools for the kids, you want houses, you want public transport or something like that, internet, whatever, clean water. Like, everyone wants the same thing, right? And I feel like people who are, let's say, active as in, they want to protest or they want to do things like, they don't understand that they are co-opted in a way, right? Like, they are doing something, but it's not fruitful. They are just yelling at someone who's not listening to them. They don't care about you. Literally, this woman in the White House is saying random things, and still no one cares. She says ridiculous things, and no one cares.
Absurd
right?
things.
Absurd, yeah. So you're in the street, you're like shouting, whatever you're shouting. Like, no one cares that you're doing that. You should. That is not action. The action is voting with your money. You have to move away from the money that they're corrupting, because then we can align all the incentives, and we can actually beat all these people that are breaking the money. It's eventually, I think it's very, very simple, but as long as you yell to a paradigm or like a system that you still operate in, then you're doing this round virtue trip or whatever you want to call it. It's fruitless. right?
It's like the just stop oil people. Did you see the video of them
dude. Oh my God.
throwing orange paint on Stonehenge?
Thing.
It's like you. First of all, you are not bringing anyone over to your cause. In fact, you are making so many people hate your cause, like so much. And
what
this
did
is not
Stonehenge do?
yeah. What did that priceless work of art do?
Yeah.
What did those people who are just trying to get to work and actually be productive members of society, but you're blocking the highway? What did they do? And it's this completely. It's just this yelling into the void.
Yes.
About about what you perceive to be a problem, but actually doing nothing of substance to try and fix that. Like, I would have a little bit of respect for them if they actually did something other than just shout. But they're not doing anything. You're defacing beautiful works of art. You're defacing, megaliths from thousands of years ago. You are blocking people who are trying to do productive work in this society. Like, you are just an absolute waste of space. And if you actually gave it, like, not even to get into the fact that okay, oil is going to be around for a very long time. It is energy dense and allows us to have all the trappings of modern life that allow you to be a faux communist on X. Like that is we are able to do all of these things.
Cobalt-powered iPhone.
Yeah, while you drive your EV that is only possible because a bunch of children in a country you've never heard of. Dug up cobalt and breathe it in every day. But no, you're doing great. You're changing the world by being a little crybaby who does absolutely nothing and contributes nothing and produces nothing. It's like no, you're not. Like you're the perpetual college student studying some pointless major and then begging for a refund when you realize that all you can be is a barista. And there's nothing wrong with being a barista. That's a job where you're actually producing something there. But some of these people, they never dream of stooping so low. They have a degree. So what shall they do? They'll protest. Like, what a privilege to be able to live your life where you can just go and produce nothing and protest and ruin things. You spoiled little brat. Sorry, got.
I couldn't agree more.
The Stonehenge thing ticked me off.
Especially. I saw that. No, it's just so random. It's just that's why I used the word co-opted. I don't talk about this a lot, but I feel like this is not the way. Like, I feel you. I think. Oh, this is a totally different conversation. But, well, do humans do something to the environment? Yes, obviously. Do we do that more than before because there's more people? Yeah, probably we do. Yes, does the climate change because we are in this like infinite universe and we turn around and there's like great years? Like, yeah, also, right? Like, it's the pointing at this group of other people and being like, you are bad, you should stop. Like, that's not action. Like, you have to take action. I think it's almost when you were talking about it, I feel like it's a disdain of life, right? Like, it's like, yeah, my thoughts are co-opted and I'm just gonna like glue my hand to the asphalt here or something. Like, what are you doing? Nobody cares. You're fucking annoying. Everyone thinks you're annoying. Everyone who's on their way to work thinks you're annoying. I don't even like this subject. We shouldn't even talk about it.
I know.
It's draining.
Let's not give them any more airtime. The last thing I would say on it is like, there are two types of people. There's the people that claim they want to. There's a problem, but they provide no solution, and they do nothing to work toward any solution because they don't have a solution. They just have a problem they want to whine about. Then there's the kind of people that look and say, there's a problem. We should fix it. Here's a solution. I'm going to build it. And then I guess there's also the other type of person that just, like, some people make things happen, some people watch things happen, some people wonder what the fuck happened. Like, there's that third type that just has no idea what's going on, even after the fact. But yeah, no more time for the just stop oil people. You worthless drains.
Anything else on our list? I have some time left, so I'm good for whatever.
I do too. So I mean, one other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit, because I'm always keen to talk on this, is just the kind of changing media landscape in general, and Like you're on Noster as well, right? Have you been using?
I have an account. I'm not very active, but it's
I
more.
was going to say I hadn't seen you active. We got to change that, man. We got to get those zaps flowing.
I know. I'm just really long on Twitter already, like 15 years, or like not from the beginning, but very, very early. It's just like, like the entire network is there. I think that switching cost is pretty high, I'd say. But I love the idea of...
No one's asking you to switch fully, though, you know?
No, I agree, but it's more my behavior of, I have a thought, I just type it into Twitter, then I should like paste it into Noster. There should be, if there is like some connection thing, you know, some service or tool or app, whatever, that would be great if it just gets posted on Noster as well. But I loved, by the way, that you wrote this down, because I think what is interesting is that you see, we just talked about, you know, like our kids are going to have lots of information, right? But I already see that. I think in our generation, because we had the analog time and we moved to the digital, I think we saw, you know, what I mentioned before, that compression of energy or compression of information in this case, right? From a thick phone book to, you know, a Google in a sense, right? That we are aware of, I want to say like what is information? Where can I find it? How should I judge it, right? We are pretty aware of that because we lived through it. You know, for boomers, it's perhaps a bit more overwhelming. But what I see with Gen Z, you know, I talked to a few Gen Zers also on the podcast. What I see with them, it's like a barbell, right? Like one side is very nihilistic and it's like the world is dying. I'm gluing my hand to the asphalt type person, or my arm, or you know, the world is not dying. I'm dyeing my hair anyway. And the other side is like super optimistic, super informed, very, you know, vocal, active, way more than when I was 18, when I was just, you know, literally playing Call of Duty, hanging out, you know, at some study. I don't even know what I was doing at 18. You know, they are super active and very vocal and very informed. And I think that is very interesting when you look at like the evolvement of media in a sense. Like, I don't know if this is true, but I see like these numbers that for like a prime time, some CNN show, it's like 800,000-ish viewers or something. Like,
it's awful. And
or
CNN's,
less,
I think,
right? Like it's
or
not,
less.
Right?
And that's prime time, like
yes, exactly.
Literal prime time.
Joe Rogan is like 120 million plays per episode, or 100-ish, or 80 million. I don't know, like that range, you know. It's already done. Like mainstream media is not mainstream media. Yeah, the people in charge of mainstream media, you know, it's kind of the same as in the banking game, I would say. Like they're trying to keep their positions. But the younger people see through this, right? Like if you scroll on Twitter and you see, I actually saw 2 New York Times tweets yesterday or today. I saw 2 tweets where I was like, really, is this? I would love to look it up. Sorry, I'm going to look it up because I was like, is this the New York Times? Like my perspective of the New York Times is something totally, totally different than what is here. Wait,
I'm curious on these. While you look that up,
I think it's New York Times. Sorry.
No, you're
I hope
good.
I'm correct.
Well, either way, they all, you know, many of them have the same ultimate owners at the end of the day. You know, there's different.
High temperature takes a toll on our brains, makes us aggressive, impulsive, and dumb. Research shows. Here's what to know about the heat wave sweeping across the U.S. That wasn't even a one, but that's the one I just like. It's
that's well, I've got some things I could say about that.
I saw one about a woman who quit drinking 2 glasses of wine each day because it made her feel better. I was like, yeah, duh. Like, what is this? You know, what is going on? But I feel like it's. I used to be like all into tech, you know, like in startups, like these publications, like Mashable, TechCrunch, all these things. If you look at that now on Twitter, it's all nonsense. It's all clickbait. Literally, It's all clickbait. They are milking their cash cow is literally what they are doing, right? There's no insightful long-form conversations, no deep dive journalism, real investigative, all that stuff. All that stuff is independent journalists on Twitter, basically, right? Or Substack, stuff like that. It's already unbundled like crazy. And the younger generation, I think, not only knows that, but they are gonna enhance that. They are gonna follow these independent people, right?
Yeah.
Because the independent people can show their integrity or be more transparent, whereas like a bigger media corp, you know, they have shareholders, they have advertisers, like they're just pretending. And I think a lot of Gen Zers, at least on one side of the barbell, they don't take that bullshit anymore.
You know, and I think the changing media landscape can basically be summed up as it's a contest between centralization and decentralization. Centralization is legacy corporate media. That's having, you know, and it used to be even so much more centralized. If we think about, you know, if you were watching the evening news, there was like one channel to do it on at one point, you know, many decades ago. And that's where you got your news, in that 1 hour block a night. And what was said there was, for most people, probably deemed to be true and accurate, most of which was also propaganda. But, you know, it was really centralized. It was a one-way information flow, and you didn't have any sort of options. Now, with independent journalism, with podcasts, with, you know, anyone that wants to can have a show on YouTube. They can have a show on Rumble, or a you know, audio podcast. They don't even ever have to show their face if they don't want to. They can stay anonymous. You can have a true free market and optionality for the viewer with all sorts of, you don't have to just go with one source. You can pick and choose and find people that fit what you want, and find conflicting views as opposed to just the same homogenous view from, you know, all the major news sources. And you actually have a chance, you have choice, and that's a good thing. And then, you know, at the same time, we see that like the centralization model is just, it's failing. There's layoffs across all these major news companies. The quality of their work, which was, you know, many of these places did have really good journalists working for them at sometimes that did used to publish hard-hitting journalism and expose corruption, but now it just feels like they're all regime mouthpieces. But they're failing. They're all resorting to clickbait. You can tell that they're flailing in their death throes, trying to figure out how to possibly stay relevant and make money, and it's not working. Because there is so much choice for people, and because anybody can be a creator. Anybody can start a podcast. Anybody can start a Bitcoin podcast. You know, another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Keep it rolling. But that's such a good thing. And where I also think Noster fits into this is that, and the reason that I've been on since, well, relatively early, is that you now have a way to completely decentralize the publication medium itself. Because that's the other thing when it comes to independent content creators and decentralized media. When you're still relying on centralized tools that are still gatekeepers, that can still be shut down, where you can still be banned, where you can be canceled, where you can be demonetized, whatever it may be, that's still a vulnerability. That's still centralization, not in terms of the voices that are available, but in terms of the gatekeepers that decide what voices are available. Yeah, you still have options, but if the person that you really like to get your news from gets kicked off of YouTube and you always watch it on YouTube, where do you go? And that's why I'm very hopeful, because of all that's being built on Noster, and because it's a many-headed hydra. You know, there's not one throat to choke. There's many different heads, and you cut off one, two more will spring up in its place. And the other reason is because I think it's genuinely a better tool for creatives, for creators, for people who want to have a single identity that they can then use across everything. Like it's, as you know, this as a podcast, like it's a pain in the ass to have to, okay, like, let me upload this to YouTube. Let me upload this, you know, on my RSS feed. Let me post this on Twitter. Let me do all these things. With Noster, you have one NPub where you post this from, and you know, create another one for your show if you like. But you have one NPub, and then that distributes to every single Noster client that anyone is using without you needing to do any extra work. Like, from a workflow perspective, Noster is superior. And you're right that it does not yet have the network effect that X does. Of course not. Like it's not even close. But it's going to creep up there. And I would not be surprised if we saw something like X integrating into becoming, in a sense, a sort of Noster client as well. In addition to having their own homespun or a completely centralized silo, why not pull in from this decentralized network, and why not publish to that decentralized network as well? That's what I think we'll start to see happen, is some of the legacy systems start to adopt some of the benefits that they can get from becoming pseudo Noster clients as well. But legacy media is dying. You're right that it's not mainstream anymore. The mainstream is independent, decentralized media, and that's a really good thing, because it also forces people to make their own value judgments about what they want, but also about what is true. It's not just you're being fed a single sources. You can take in a lot of different sources and actually come to your own conclusion, to have your own original opinions versus just whatever is fed to you nonstop by the behemoth of the media conglomerate. And that's a good thing. But a lot of people also aren't ready for that because they just want to be told what to think. They don't want to think for themselves.
You know that meme of the video where they stitch like all these news segments about the same subject, where like different anchors say the exact same thing, and you hear like all these voices on top of each other. Yeah. Well, I think it is somewhat similar what you're saying to banking and money and Bitcoin in a sense. I'm not sure if there's a way to kind of like also keep all these independent journalists or researchers, or media producers, whatever you want to call them, like in check, as we talked about what you can do when you adopt a Bitcoin standard or Bitcoin as a base layer of money. But I would agree it's easier to differentiate yourself, being fully transparent, for example, as an independent journalist versus hiding behind some corporate, stock exchange ticker. I think just that already is really interesting. What I found is the bar is actually pretty low in general, right? And it seems like it's high, but the bar is actually really low if you just do the work and are honest and transparent, and I would say, like honest in your motivation. That's enough for a lot of people, and I think, I don't know how you experience that with your podcast, but I get wonderful messages from people who listen and appreciate what I'm doing, and it's really rewarding to get those messages also, because I don't want to say like it feels seen, but it's like it's acknowledged that you're coming from a good place, and that is motivating in itself, right? And like wherever this podcast ends up, or how big it becomes, or if I can dedicate my life to it or whatever, that comes from doing the actual work. And I think that is what I also love about the Bitcoin ethos, is I think all these things that we talked about, in this chat about people who are in charge of a certain aspect of our life while they don't care about our individual life, we as the people, we accept that in some way, but we accept their words. We don't accept their work, and I think with a Bitcoin mindset or Bitcoin as a base layer of the money, we turn that around. Like, you have to do the work. If you want to earn Bitcoin for whatever work you do, you have to do the work, i.e. you have to deliver value, or someone else will not pay you with the most valuable thing to ever exist, right? And I think that ethos is something that I think is very, very special, and also, just like the other things we talked about, just very contradictory to the current paradigm. Like, people can talk shit, the woman in the White House can talk shit, and nobody cares. Like, wow, how does that even work? But this is where we are, and that realization, again, I think is just something we need to talk about more. Like, that is where we are. You are just accepting nonsense from people that have control over you, but they don't care about you, and you're like, okay, whatever.
How about that game last night?
Yeah, but it's just, I don't know. I hope we can inspire more people to think for themselves and try to do the work. As you said, just don't watch the game. Spend a few hours, listen or read to the Bitcoin Standard or whatever, and just be curious, and be humble, as in, know that you don't know. Try to get to a point where you know that you don't know everything. For me, I read that once. I don't know if it's Aristotle or Epictetus or some Stoic guy who said something similar to this. But I read that once and I was like, yeah, like seriously, probably the only Stoic thing I actually really adopted in my life is that. Like, once you know that you don't know everything, then like all the doors open, because you know that there's other people who are all the other people have the same. So no other person is better than you. So why should you allow them to exert this power over you when they don't care about you? Like they also don't know anything. They're also just winging it, figuring out what life is about. That frees your mind incredibly, at least for me.
Yeah, the realization that the people in charge have no fucking clue what they're doing is very powerful, and that they have no right to do what they're doing to you. This system has been constructed in such a way that they have a perceived power over you, but they ultimately don't. Not unless you let them. But you have to at some point make the conscious decision to opt out. Like nobody can opt out for you. You have to do that part yourself. You have to do a little bit of work. You have to go in and say, I'm fed up with this, and I want something different for myself, for my family, for my future. And I know that they're not going to fix my problems. Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody gives a shit about you. Like, you give a shit about you. Your family gives a shit about you. You give a shit about your family. Some close friends give a shit about you. And that's about where the giving a shit ends. But nobody in power gives a rat's ass about you or your family in any real way. They pretend to so that they can stay in power and you'll keep voting for them and keep giving them your money. But they do not care about you. And that realization, as you said, that they're just people. They care about their friends. They care about their family. They care about their children. They do not care about you. You need to care about you and your family and take care of them, because nobody's going to do it for you. And the state is not going to save you. The state is going to be your ruin if you let it. So that's why you have to opt out. But you have to do it yourself. Nobody's going to hold your hand and do it for you. You have to do it yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the opt-out starts with just opt out just with your thinking.
Yeah.
That's where it starts. It doesn't mean something huge or, you go in the streets and revolt or whatever. No, it's the thinking. Just opt out with your thinking, or start thinking. And then I think, the government doesn't care about you. I think that's, that James Carlyle is a great one. But I think maybe the last thing we could talk about, I think is nice, that also the government and all the institutions, right, they are all made up of individuals that care about the same thing as you care about, right? Like what we talked about, their own life, their own children, progeny, all these things. And eventually they will feel the results of the broken money system as well. And they are hopefully going to start to think for themselves as well. And because we are starting yet another Bitcoin podcast, they will discover Bitcoin. And they will see that it is that solution that, we've talked about, that brings transparency and honesty in this new ledger, and that will improve your life. And they are going to change the organizations that they work in as well, because they care more about themselves than they care about the organization, right? So either they're going to opt out of the organization, or they're going to want to change the organization or tell more people about this. And that is how it's going to change. But that's a really long game. But I think that is a very optimistic thing to think about, right? Like, just the fact that, whatever you think of BlackRock and Wall Street and all these things, the fact that they adopted a random idea that was, published on a random internet forum 15 years ago is fucking wild. That is the signal. There's individuals in this big behemoth that all signed off on this thing, and eventually they adopted it. You might not like the finance bros. I'm sad they figured it out, but eventually everything, all the corporations, all the governments, it's all individuals, right? And so I have this example that I used in another podcast where I said, like, imagine there's like this guy from a tax agency in whatever country, right? And he's going to call, Bitcoiners that did KYC stuff, and he's going to call them and be like, hey, this Bitcoin thing is like 500K. It's time you start paying the taxes or whatever, right? And then he's going to call 20, 30 Bitcoiners, and they're all going to be like, what are you talking about? Bitcoin? Yeah, I bought that on like fucking Binance or something, but I lost the key or I had a boating accident or whatever, And this person is going to have 30 of these conversations where they're all like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, no, I don't have access to it anymore, right? And he's going to think like, what are these people on, And it's going to be a bit weird. And he's be like, they're fucking annoying. But then he goes to the grocery store and his spinach is like $50. And he's going to be like, shit, my life sucks. Like, I had all these fucking conversations today and my spinach is $50. And he's going to go home and he's going to be like, maybe I should look into this Bitcoin thing, right? And then he finds yet another Bitcoin podcast. And then he's going to change his thinking. And it's really, that is my hope, or how I see the future. Eventually, these people they have a job to preserve their own life, right? And if there's people that have a way different look at life and you realize that you cannot afford your own life anymore and you have a shitty job, you are forced to start fucking thinking, right? And so I love to use that as an example because that, I think, is how it goes. But it's a slow grind. It's a very slow... It's a slow grind. But yeah, I see that as a positive outlook, that everyone is just also their own individual, right? I don't think the people in charge are malicious or all the people, not all the people in the government are malicious or working against you. They're working for themselves in a system that is working against lots of other people in the country. And yeah, they're just, focusing on themselves, which is fine. But there's going to be a point where it's going to start trickling down and they're going to either experience the problem more or they're going to figure out that this Bitcoin thing might be something to pay attention to. And that's how this mind virus is going to take over the world, I think.
I think that's a perfect white/orange pill to end on. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin, right? Is that the game theory of Bitcoin makes people want to adopt Bitcoin because it is in their own self-interest to do so.
Yes.
Even if they don't like it at first, even if it threatens the current paradigm that they operate in, it's still in their best interest to adopt Bitcoin. And that is an incredible thing. And that's why Bitcoin is winning. That's why you have presidential candidates falling over themselves, who are going to compete for who loves Bitcoin more, who's going to protect Bitcoin more.
Fascinating, no?
It is, and Bitcoin doesn't need politicians, but politicians need Bitcoin. Everybody needs Bitcoin, even if they don't know it yet, and that is why Bitcoin is winning, and Bitcoin will win. And I think if you're good, I think that's a good note to end on. Unless one question I ask my guests all the time, and I'm curious from you. Are you reading anything right now that you'd recommend? And is there something
yes.
that you... Yeah, I always like to know.
I have a fun ender for you as well.
Oh, all right.
We have a fun ending. I'm not reading it yet, but I just got it in. This is called... Can you see that? Or is it in mirrored? I don't know.
No, it'll flip around. What's the title?
It's called Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the Mechanics of Consciousness by Itzhak Bentov. I saw him in a few videos. I saw... Wait, I'll read the back cover, yeah? In his exciting and original view of the universe, Itzhak Bentov has provided a new perspective on human consciousness and its limitless possibilities. Widely known and loved for his delightful humor and imagination, Bentov explains the familiar world of phenomena with perceptions that are as lucid as they are thrilling. He gives a provocative picture of ourselves in an expanded, conscious, holistic universe, showing us that our bodies mirror the universe down to the working of each cell. That's as above, so below, right? Micro and macrocosmos. We are pulsating beings in a vibrating universe in a constant motion between the finite and the infinite. The universe and all matter is consciousness in the process of developing. Our brains are thought amplifiers, not thoughts source. So you are not your thoughts, right? The universe is a hologram, and so is the brain a hologram interpreting a holographic universe. That's mind-bending.
Yeah, that is.
We can instantly reclaim any information ever known. That's fun. So yeah, I love stuff like this. I'm all like, one rabbit hole is Bitcoin, the other rabbit hole is all this consciousness stuff. But I saw him, and then I discovered he had a book. So that's what I just got. Yeah,
I'll have to check that out. I just started. It's a pretty short one, so I just started and almost just finished. Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. John Taylor Gatto was recommended to me by Shane Hazel as a really transformative writer, and he was a New York school teacher for like 30 plus years, but he writes about how messed up the educational or indoctrination system of the United States is, and it's really quite fascinating. And also, again, from a teacher's perspective, it's not an outsider looking in, it's an insider looking out and telling you how broken it is. And so it's really, really excellent. So would highly recommend that as well. It's probably not quite as cerebral. It's as what you're about to dive into there.
This is pretty out there.
Hey, yeah. I love that though. Wait, you said you had an ender as well?
Yes. So sometimes I see people tweet about, Bitcoin is going mainstream. We are crossing the chasm, from like adopters. This distribution, I would assume, right? Like innovators, early adopters, early majority, etc. Right? And between early adopters and early majority, there's a chasm, right? That's like it's like a space that new technology in terms of adoption has to cross. So you have to have reached enough people. So some people talk about that, right? They say like, oh yeah, we're crossing the chasm, blah blah. And I absolutely think we are not. We are super early. And I once replied to someone, I think 1 million people in the world understand Bitcoin tops, right? Like tops, 1 million people. But understand it like we understand this, like not just how it works, but all the implications, all the dimensions it touches, etc. And I wanted to ask you what your number is, and then I'll have a little kicker too.
I think it's far less than 1 million who really understand the far-reaching potential, but I would also say maybe 1 million is a nice round number, but that feels high to me. But if we're talking about not just what is Bitcoin, but why does Bitcoin need to exist?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I would also say that for Bitcoin to succeed, it's not necessary for everyone to understand the what and the why. Because at a certain point, it becomes so ubiquitous, and there is so much money, there's so much wealth, there's so much value concentrated in this technology, in this network, and in the asset that moves around on it, that it's just going to become a part of people's lives, whether they understand it or not. Fiat is ubiquitous. We all of us use fiat. Very few of us understand it.
100%. Yeah.
Now, and that's a terrible thing, because when you understand fiat, you realize that you're being robbed. With Bitcoin, at least it may be happening in the background. It may be it will be the monetary technology that all value is benchmarked against. But
that's a good
at least
definition, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you. But because that's what it is. It's a benchmark. It's an honest ledger. We have, like, gold is a pretty good measuring stick for value across time, right? Because you can look at like the old idea of like the price of a suit. A good tailored suit is basically the same in terms of gold, from 100 years ago to now. Like it's basically the same. And that's cool because that's at least some form of benchmark. But gold's a bad benchmark because gold is not transparent. The supply of gold isn't transparent. It's useful enough, but now we have a better benchmark. We have a better technology, and that's Bitcoin. And so I think that, to your original point, while I enjoy wondering how many people really understand it, at the same time, they don't need to understand it to benefit from it. They will benefit much more from it if they do understand it. Because if you really understand it, you're going to do everything you can to acquire as much as you possibly can. But just the simple fact that we will start to operate and are already starting to operate with a more honest ledger as our base layer of society, that's a net benefit for society in and of itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what's funny is when I first asked this question, I wanted to illustrate like how early it was, right? Like 1 million people on like 8 billion people is just nothing. But later I came to the realization, exactly as you said, so I love that you said it, right? Like it doesn't matter if everyone understands, because, if you ask a random person, can you explain to me how fiat money works? No clue. Or how your iPhone works or your car or, whatever. What's an LED light, like stuff like that. So that's a very good point. But here's the kicker. So later I was like, no, a million is too much. I talked to some people and then I thought, okay, well, maybe 200,000, 250K tops, right? Like in that range. Then yesterday I spoke to a guy, investment banker from Switzerland, who's also like friends with Willy Woo and Jeff Booth. And I asked him the same question and he's like 10,000 people. And I include Jeff and Willy too, he said. Like that, those. He said 10,000 people. And I was like, okay, it's also, it could be like, it's very difficult to think in how big a group of people is. But anyway, between 10K and let's say 250K, let's say we get to 500K, right? People actually on the highest level understand Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a never-ending rabbit hole, but you know what I mean. You can change the world with 500,000 people.
Yeah.
That's a crazy thought. That's a very crazy thought.
And you can change the world with 10,000. That's the
even.
And the
right?
world is changing with 10,000. That's the incredible thing.
But cool, right? Like
it is.
If you
it
think
is cool.
Numbers wise.
Yeah, it's like, wow, that is but that's what happens. It's generally a small group of people who are really passionate about something and incredibly driven, who do change the world. It's not a giant group of people acting en masse. Those people may be spurred on by that smaller group of people, but every large change starts with a small number of people. And I mean, ultimately it starts with one, right? It starts with literally one person or one group of a couple people. That in this case, it starts with Satoshi. It starts with one and it moves from there. But if that ultimately means that one person can change the world, and that's something to celebrate. So
100%. And maybe also last point when I'm thinking about the book is because we are doing that, our brains are thought amplifiers, not thought source. I love that, right? Like that's kind of like about manifesting and stuff like that. We are actively manifesting Bitcoin in the world, right? Like all these thousands of people together are actually doing it. And if we could actually bring this idea, this concept into the world together, then we literally manifested that into the world by all of our actions. Yeah. And that's just really cool. It's just really cool to at least be part of trying to do that, And maybe that's the ender then.
That's perfect. We are changing the world, and it started with one, and now it's many. But the many are still the few, but the few can do quite a lot to influence the rest of the many, and that's powerful. But Bram, this was I enjoyed this chat. We'll have to do this again sometime. I think. Once we're both at Peter McCormick levels of downloads.
Yeah.
Once we're, I don't know. I think he's too far gone. I don't think we can catch him. I'm glad he exists because he's
Me too.
he's a good guy and he puts out great stuff. So, and honestly, if I wouldn't have listened to his podcast, I probably would not be sitting here today with a podcast of my own talking about Bitcoin with another guy who has a Bitcoin podcast. We wouldn't be podcasting about our Bitcoin podcast together on the same podcast if it wasn't for a podcaster. So
yes, 100%.
Shout out to the podcasters. But
yeah, man. Well, thanks so much. 2-hour rip. We did well. We just started talking and love that.
And we could keep going, but I've now it's it's late for you and it's time for some family time for me. So great chatting with you and look forward to doing it again.
Likewise, man. Thank you. Appreciate you.
And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you're a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor. If you're enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving a 5-star review wherever you listen or sharing this show with your network. Or don't. Bitcoin doesn't care. You can find me on Noster by going to primal.net/Walker. And if you want to follow the Bitcoin Podcast on Twitter, go to @TitcoinPodcast and @WalkerAmerica. You can also find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica and @WalkerAmerica on Rumble. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.